Ukraine wants to add F-16 fighter jets to its fleet of aircraft, but it's looking at other options too. One of them seems to be the Swedish Gripen fighter, similar to these. President Zelensky says he spoke about them with Sweden's Prime Minister during a visit to that country on Saturday. Zelensky also says the two nations will follow up on those talks in the coming weeks. Nada Bashir is monitoring developments in Ukraine. She joins us now from London. So Nada, let's start with the latest on the attack on Chernihiv.
Yeah, well, we've had those troubling updates from the Ukrainian authorities. As you mentioned there, Kim, at least 148 people reportedly injured following that attack on Saturday, and among them 15 children wounded and 7 confirmed dead. And of course, this has left a huge amount of infrastructural damage. According to the Ukrainian authorities, this missile attack took place at around 11:30 a.m. local time yesterday. It actually took place on a day which marks a major Orthodox holiday in Ukraine, and we've heard from the country's Minister for Internal Affairs saying that people were leaving church as they were struck by these missiles which targeted a key square in the city. Take a listen to one eyewitness account from yesterday.
There were screams, a lot of dead and wounded, ambulances. It's horrible. I'm helping now to clean up. It's a real tragedy.
I was in a shop right next to the square, near a bus stop. I entered the shop, went up to a window, and that whole window fell on me. I fell. I was in shock. Then I gained my consciousness back. I was knocked down by the explosion force.
Now, in addition to striking that town square, it also struck more than 60 residential buildings, according to Ukrainian authorities, as well as a university building and a theatre. And in fact, it is in this theatre that, according to the authorities, a drone demonstration meeting, a closed meeting, had been set to take place with members of the Ukrainian armed forces, as well as drone manufacturers in Ukraine present. And there have been calls from the Minister for Internal Affairs for an investigation into this, what they believe to be a targeted strike on this theatre. And of course, this comes as the Ukrainian authorities, and in particular President Zelensky, continue to push for further military support from their international partners, not least, of course, from their counterparts in Sweden. We saw President Zelensky meeting with his Swedish counterparts. They discussed a boost in military support, a new military aid package, and also mentioned that Ukrainian pilots are already carrying out test flights on those Swedish-made Gripen jets. That will be a significant boost to Ukraine's counter-offensive. And of course, they've also now begun looking into further support on terms of artillery, further artillery support, as well as training Ukrainian troops to operate Swedish-made armoured vehicles, which are set to be sent to Ukraine. They have signed now a statement of intent on that agreement. That is going to be a huge boost for their counter-offensive.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Nada Bashir. Appreciate it.
Russia is reporting 2 new drone strikes from across the border in Ukraine. The mayor of Moscow says one drone was shot down south of the capital overnight, while another alleged drone wounded 5 people in the city of Kursk, according to a local governor. He says the attack damaged a railway station, but train service is still up and running. Meanwhile, Ukraine now says 15 children are among the wounded following the Russian missile strike on the city of Chernihiv. At least 7 people were killed and close to 150 others injured after a missile hit the city center on Saturday. While over in Kyiv, top military officials say Ukrainian pilots have started training on F-16 fighter jets. But who will provide the planes and when are still open questions. Well, for more on this latest development, Nada Bashir joins us now live from London. Nada, Ukraine did receive potentially more good news related to the F-16s?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Leila, we saw some delay on that front. There are questions around the time frame of when we would begin to see Ukrainian pilots receiving that crucial training on the US-made jets. Now, according to Ukraine's Air Force, that training has begun. They are receiving training from US instructors within Ukraine. And of course, typically, this sort of training on these advanced jets would take months. According to Ukrainian officials, typically it would take something around 32 months. But they say this elite class of Ukrainian pilots set to take part in this training program can master the operation of this jet within just 4 months. Now, we've also heard from Ukraine's defense minister. He's given a slightly longer assessment, saying it could take a minimum of 6 months. And of course, that will be a blow to Ukraine's air defense and military aspirations over the coming months, particularly in the harsher winter months as they continue to grind on with that counter-offensive. But this training will prove crucial, and the hope from Ukraine is that the supply of these jets will mark a shift in their counter-offensive, give them that all-important edge in the skies. And of course, there still remain a couple of questions. We've heard from the Ukrainian defense minister saying that it remains to be decided what weapons these jets will be kitted out with once they are supplied to Ukraine. We know, of course, that the US has expressed its commitment to approve the supply of these jets as soon as that training is complete. And of course, there are still talks ongoing between the US and its European partners over what other countries might potentially supply Ukraine with these US-made F-16s. But of course, we also now know that President Zelensky has been in talks with counterparts in Sweden over the possible supply of the Swedish-made Gripen fighter jet. That is expected to be an ongoing discussion. The hope there is that will bolster Ukraine's air defense operations and also, of course, offensive operations as they continue to battle Russia's ongoing encroachment in the eastern region. Meanwhile, those talks are ongoing, but Ukraine and Sweden appeared to have agreed on a statement of intent on the supply of Swedish-made armoured vehicles to boost Ukraine's counteroffensive capabilities on the front line.
Major. So let's talk about, this new reporting from our Katie Bolillis that American officials are concerned about the strategy in Ukraine where they're focusing this emphasis on Crimea. And we're learning that, of course, some American officials are not happy about it. What are your thoughts on this strategically?
Yeah, I think Katie Bo's reporting is spot on. It's a little bit critical to say that it might stall, that it might not be successful. That's a truthful assessment, or at least there's an element of truth within that, and there's some concern. The thing that the Ukrainians are doing right now is they are expending intellectual firepower and they're expending firepower on objectives that are not directly attributing or at least contributing to the success of trying to isolate Russian forces. And then as a result of that isolation, you then must reduce those forces. When you go after targets in Crimea, they've also taken shots into Moscow a couple of weeks ago. Those are distractions. What needs to take place is all of those weapon systems, all of that planning, all of the direction that the Ukrainians need to take right now needs to be on one or two very specific objectives so that they can achieve some immediate tactical success and then exploit that success. When you start throwing firepower in the direction of Moscow and then deep into Crimea, you're not going to achieve that.
So why is Ukraine's counteroffensive so slow going so far? I mean, 2 months in, and there hasn't been any major breakthroughs at this point. I mean, what's the biggest concern?
Well, look, the Russians are in a defensive posture. Attacks against defensive positions require a 3-to-1 advantage. I would suggest the Ukrainians probably don't have that 3-to-1 advantage in terms of the attack. And also the Russians have been digging in over the course of the previous 5 months before the offensive began, which means they have defense in depth. They have positions that support positions. They have fire that crosses each other, which means they've laid a ton of mines, makes it very, very slow going. This is an incredible tough task on the part of the Ukrainians. That's why, frankly, when you look at the strikes in Crimea, you get the sense that they are trying to throw some haymakers, that wild left punch. That's not going to achieve success. What's going to achieve success is continued tactical penetration of those defensive belts so that you can isolate those forces. Once a military unit is isolated, they're incredibly vulnerable. That's what Ukraine needs to try to achieve. And I would say one more thing, Amra, that what the Ukrainians are doing now looks not dissimilar to what the Russians did when they invaded in February. The Russians got way over their skis, multiple axes of approach, and the Ukrainians very, very quickly were able to stop them and then to push the Russians back. I'd hate to say it, but it looks like the Ukrainians might have failed to learn that lesson.
Wow.